Five reasons why Washington is going to upset Ohio State. Reason number one, because I said so.
Touchdown, Wolverine!
Welcome back to the Michigan Wolverines Team Rivalry Show. If you don't mind liking and subscribing to the channel, if you have not already done so, that would mean a lot to us. And I realized on the last pod that I never asked to do that. I asked to do it at the very end. But who's actually still watching by the end of the video? Am I right? I mean, come on. I see the average watch time. The average watch time, I get excited when it's 8 or 9 minutes on a half-hour long pod. I don't know why I'm recording half-hour long pods because even I don't want to watch for a half hour. So what am I doing? I don't know. I listen to half-hour pods. But yeah, if you don't mind liking and subscribing, that would mean a lot to us. It helps us appease the YouTube algorithmic gods. And I guess we'll just go ahead and get into it then. I wanted to discuss this interesting Washington versus Ohio State game. Reason being, first and foremost, because Michigan doesn't play this weekend. So there's not really anything to talk about with that. There are some things that I could cover in terms of what I hope they accomplish over the bye week, but that's all just kind of conjecture because I can say, till I'm blue in the face, oh, I hope that they get healthy. Oh, I hope that they practice not dropping the ball because that was a big problem against Nebraska. Holy crap. And it does sound like, according to Sharon Moore, that they are going to be practicing not dropping the ball. I don't know if maybe they just didn't put enough of that sticky stuff on their hands to help them, keep a firm grip on the ball or what they need to do there. Maybe they need those, what are the things where you grip for your hand strength? I'm watching myself in the video over here so I can make sure you can see what I'm doing. I don't know. Maybe they need to do something like that, but the drop balls were a problem. But I figured instead, because views have been down lately on the channel, I haven't been able to post very much because I've been traveling. It's spelled with a V, not a B. I've been sick, so it's been difficult to record. So I got to come out with something that's a little clickbaity to try and get people watching. And so here we go. Washington's going to beat Ohio State. And I've got 5 reasons why that's going to happen. But I wanted to cover this article first. And because I think it pretty well says what I was going to say after I did my 30 seconds of research and came up with an opinion on this game. I found this article and I think it's pretty good, and I want to go through it. So Ohio State versus, I already misread the title. Ohio State versus Washington prediction. Huskies should test number 1 Buckeyes by Pete Futak. I think that's how you say that. Really, how good is Ohio State? It's not like Texas has been razor sharp since the 14-7 opener in Columbus, and the Buckeyes haven't had to push themselves in wins over Grambling and Ohio. But now they have got to go to work. And that's actually not entirely true because against Ohio, it was a 1-score game in the third quarter at one point. So they did have to work to get that one going a little bit. But the article goes into the fact that Ohio State has to make the long trip to Seattle. It's the first of many road games kind of in a row for them. They have a date with Minnesota coming up. Minnesota's, I don't expect that to be much of an issue for them. Penn State coming up right after. The interesting thing, though, is that Washington has actually not been playing too bad lately. If we look at their schedule here on ESPN, they took out Colorado State to start the season. It was a 38-21 win. Then they put up 70 on UC Davis. Once you score 70 points, you've got the 50 burger, the 60, I don't know, the 60, the 60 bomb, 50 burger, 60 taco, 70 pita pocket. I like pitas. Obviously, UC Davis is nothing to, write home about. No offense, guys. But they did put up 70 points against them, and that's huge. But I think the really interesting result is this 59-24 result against Washington State in the Apple Cup. Now, I don't think that Washington State has themselves been anything to write home about lately, but they're also not going to be the pushovers that, UC Davis would be. So this is, I think this is a decently respectable result against somebody like Washington State, although that 24 points is a little bit sus. We'll get into that in just a second here. Washington is just getting going under Jed Fish. In year 2, he has more of his guys in place, and it's showing, especially at quarterback, I should say. with 3 good, easy wins, including a landmine sidestepped in a 59-24 blowout over Washington State. The teams have yet to meet. Ohio State, or as Big Ten members, Ohio State last beat Washington in the 2019 Rose Bowl, 28-23. It's just their 13th meeting overall. Now, here's his reasoning for why Ohio State will win the game. So for some teams, not having to play a real game for 3 weeks might be a problem, but it's different for Ohio State. I don't think it's different for Ohio State. I think Ohio State is consistently really good, for sure. But I think that we still don't really know how good, like he said at the beginning of the article, we still don't really know how good this Ohio State team is because they haven't really been, and this is going to sound ridiculous because I get it. It's not like Texas is a pushover. Okay. I completely understand that. But Texas has not looked good. I mean, they haven't looked like the team we expected them to be, especially during the Ohio State game, and then since then, too. Arch Manning has been off. A lot of people are already kind of pulling the rug out from underneath Arch Manning, saying that he's not who they thought they were, or he was. A lot of people have gone back and looked at his high school tape. His high school tape is rather suspicious. I mean, he looks like a man among boys out there. And, that's to his credit, but it's also kind of curious. Like, normally you see these, these really good recruits playing against other really good recruits, but he just looks like he's not really playing against much competition at all. So this has really called into question how good of a quarterback is Arch Manning really? And did we all have maybe rose-colored glasses because of what his last name is? I think those are valid questions to ask, especially with his play of late. Which, I mean, hasn't been like dreadful per se, but they said that he was going to be, this incredible quarterback. And unfortunately, and I don't mean to be rude, but he is the reason they lost against Ohio State. It's not like Ohio State was doing very well against Texas's defense. I mean, they were moving the ball in some cases, but the game ended 14-7, and Texas had many an opportunity to tie the game, to take the lead, to win the game. And it didn't happen because Arch Manning missed a lot. And I understand that Ohio State fans like to say that their defense was played really well that game and that Matt Patricia called a really good game on defense. Okay, and that's all well and good, but if you go back and look at some of those plays, there were wide receivers, tight ends that were wide open for Texas, and Arch just flat out missed them. His second interception, I want to say, the really egregious one, the one that I'm talking about, it made no sense as to why he threw that, what he was even looking at. It looked like a desperate throw, and I think it was only even the second quarter when he threw it, if I'm not mistaken. I might be wrong about that, but in any case, so Ohio State, he says, is a team loaded with new starters, but it's still coming off the super long 2024 season that went well into 2025 with the elongated CFP and the ensuing celebration. The passing game is clicking now with Julian Saying looking like a keeper at quarterback. The running attack that wasn't there against Texas ripped off chunks of yards over the last 2 games. Here's the thing, though. We got to look at who Ohio State was playing the last 2 weeks. And who are they playing? They were playing Grambling and Ohio. So, yeah, no kidding, the run game took off against Grambling and Ohio. Much respect to those 2 schools. They don't have the defensive line that Texas has. And I don't think that Texas has the defensive line that Oklahoma has, if I can just be so bold. So, of course, Ohio State's run game got going against Grambling and Ohio. Now, does that mean that Washington has the run game to keep up with Texas? Or has the defensive line similar to Texas? Not necessarily. And he kind of gets at that in the article. And I think that we also have seen that Washington doesn't really get a lot of pressure in the backfield and does sometimes have trouble stopping the run. Let me see if I can find Washington's rush yards allowed. Can I find that real quick? Team rushing yards per game. Well, no, that's offense, so that's not going to tell me. I'll think about where I can find it elsewhere. But in any case, he does make the point that Washington doesn't really get a lot of pressure in the backfield. So it's entirely possible that Ohio State's run game does do fairly well in this game against Washington, but I don't think that you can look at Ohio and Grambling and say, yes, That's indicative of Ohio State's run game being everything it needs to be. You could say that that means that Ohio State coaches did very well not to abandon the running attack, the running game plan, because it wasn't so good against Texas. I mean, it was a very smart decision for them to figure out some of the kinks in the run game against, lesser opponents so that they can kind of get into that groove. And now that they're getting into Big Ten play, maybe it'll be better. But you still do have to kind of wait and see. So he does say that the Huskies don't generate a ton of pressure in the backfield against a run. The defense needed 3 quarters to finally shut down Washington State. Okay. Here's why Washington will win. It's basically atmosphere and fundamentals. And this kind of goes into why I think that Washington can win. And now you have seen that I used AI to get these 5 reasons. The fact that this game is in Seattle is absolutely nothing to blush at. I can't remember the exact record of teams that went on the road to the West Coast last season, but it sucked. It was like 1-9, something like that. Teams that went to the other side of the country to play a game only won once, if I'm not mistaken. It was not good. The interesting question then is to kind of find out, what does that mean when you've got a team that is theoretically as good as Ohio State is going up against a team that's as competent as Washington is? And I say competent because, maybe from a talent standpoint, they're not to Ohio State's level. From a coaching standpoint, Jed Fish is a very good coach. I don't know how we can compare over the long run. That's something that we got to kind of just wait and see how that pans out. But in terms of, competency, they're right there. Washington can keep up with them. Fundamentals are very strong with Washington. They don't turn the ball over very much. They don't get penalized a whole lot. They're not going to beat themselves. Okay, so it's interesting to note, how is Ohio State going all the way to the other side of the country going to impact this game? And does that maybe bring them down a little bit to a point where Washington can maybe rise up and take advantage of that situation? Now, here's some reasons why I think Washington can beat Ohio State. Elite offensive balance. Washington averages 536 yards and 55.7 points per game, ranking top 10 in both rushing and passing. Their ability to attack from multiple angles can stress even Ohio State's elite defense. I will get into that after this sip of water. So Washington is balanced. Okay, that's great. We got to look at the sample size again, though. The sample is Colorado State, UC Davis, and Washington State, and they're putting up incredible numbers against all 3, but none of those 3 have really strong defenses to speak of necessarily. And I'll kind of say that, maybe take that with a grain of salt, because I'm not as familiar with like your Washington State this year. Actually, we can just look at 2-2. They're not bad. Well, they got blown out by North Texas, and then they got blown out by Washington. They had a close game against San Diego State and a close game against Idaho. Idaho's pretty good, aren't they? But that being said, the sample that you have there, you can't exactly say that Washington's going up against elite defenses. So when they go up against Ohio State, they're going to go up against probably the best defense that they'll see, possibly until they see Michigan. Maybe Ohio State's is going to be just slightly better, just because I think Michigan has a lot of youth and a lot of growing that they need to do in some of their maturity on defense, if I may say so. I'm sorry, that Brandon Hillman taunting penalty is just, call it soft, I don't care, but like, what is he doing? The game is over at that point. Just don't do anything and walk away. So from a talent standpoint, I think that Michigan's defense is better. And from a scheming standpoint, I think Wink Martindale can run circles around Matt Patricia. But, I'm just saying that to get comments in the comment section so that the engagement pushes this video higher. Don't take the bait, Ohio State fans. Damon Williams Jr.'s poise. He is the quarterback for Washington. He has thrown 6 touchdowns with 0 interceptions, completed nearly 74% of his passes. Against Washington State, he added 88 rushing yards and a touchdown on the ground. His dual threat capability could be a nightmare for Ohio State's scheme. That is possible. And I think that that's going to be interesting because Washington State quite possibly has both the quarterback competency and the O-line competency that maybe Texas didn't have. And I understand a lot of people are going to hear that and say, what do you mean Texas doesn't have the quarterback or O-line competency? They do, but you cannot deny, as I said earlier, Arch had a terrible game. Arch Manning had an absolutely horrible game against Ohio State. If Damon Williams doesn't have a horrible game like that against Ohio State, maybe it's possible that they actually have enough there to give Ohio State's defense some fits. The fact that he's a dual threat quarterback, the fact that they're so balanced on offense as it is anyway. I mean, they rank in the top 10 in both rushing and passing, not necessarily because Damon Williams is such a good rusher himself, but the fact that he can rush, their running game is really good, and he is completing 74% of his passes. They are a very efficient offense. Jonah Coleman's red zone dominance. So Coleman leads the Big Ten with 9 rushing touchdowns. If Washington gets inside the 20, he is their hammer, and Ohio State's red zone wall will be tested. I would love to see that. I don't necessarily think that's going to happen. Texas has a very good O-line. They have a very good running back. If they can't score from the 1-yard line, I don't know, man. That might be just a bridge too far, but it will be interesting to see for sure. But I think these last two are really where the game is going to be won or lost. Turnover margin and discipline. So Washington is +4 in turnover margin and rarely beats itself. They've committed just 1 turnover all season and average fewer penalties than most teams. The fundamentals are huge. The fundamentals are what kept Nebraska in the game against Michigan this past weekend. Michigan had a lot of penalties that were completely unnecessary. Maybe not a lot that were completely unnecessary, but they made mistakes. There were some maturity issues there that need to be ironed out. Washington's not going to make those mistakes. So you might be better than them, but you're not going to out-fundamental them. At least that's their hope, is that they're going to play so fundamentally sound, they're not going to put themselves behind the sticks. You might just play good football and you might put them behind the sticks because you're better than them, but you're going to have to be better than them. And so the pressure is then on Ohio State. Can Ohio State play disciplined football for as long as Washington can? Or does Ohio State need to rely on maybe its talent advantage to kind of push them over the edge? So maybe they're not as disciplined as Washington, but they are far more talented. Maybe not even far more, but they are more talented. Is that talent enough to carry them over the edge against Washington? And I think that this last point is kind of where you got to question that a little bit. Momentum and home field advantage. Washington is riding high after a 59-24 Apple Cup win. With Husky Stadium rocking and the team energized for its Big Ten debut, the emotional edge could tilt early momentum their way. I don't know if they're looking at Ohio State the same way that, say, Nebraska was looking at Michigan. And what I mean by that is Nebraska was looking at Michigan as food on a silver platter. Nebraska is 0-27 in their last 27 games against ranked opponents. They haven't won. I think they had some sort of streak going with Big Ten openers and yada, yada. One-score games have been an issue for them. It's year 3 of Matt Rule, and the Matt Rule year 3 rule is that he does better or gets over the hump. And Michigan looked vulnerable against New Mexico, straight up beatable against Oklahoma State, and then everybody saw the Central Michigan game and said, oh, that's Central Michigan. So you better believe coming into that game, Nebraska was looking at Michigan licking their chops like, they're good, but I think we can do this. And then they didn't. And maybe the fact that it was close doesn't actually even help that, because it was close despite the fact that they were getting absolutely bullied in the trenches. So if you're Matt Rule, not only does the final score not accurately reflect just how good Michigan is, especially, how much better than they are than Nebraska, you still technically had the ability to win that game at one point, and you just couldn't. Is Washington looking at Ohio State with the same perspective? I don't think that they necessarily would have looked at Ohio State with that perspective after the Texas game, but maybe now, because of what we know about Texas, would they look at Ohio State like that? I don't think that they will. And I think that that might even play to their advantage. They might not care. And if I'm Jedd Fisch, and if I know anything about Jedd Fisch, I would say he probably just doesn't care. I think he's looking at Ohio State, he's looking at that number 1 ranking, and he's saying they're coming to our house, and Husky Stadium gets loud, and they've got a really fundamentally sound football team. If they can scheme something up, they could do this. They just need to make sure that their defense plays sound, that their defense forces. I was going to say maybe their defense needs to force Julian Sayin to beat them with his arm, but he's doing really well as far as that's concerned. Ohio State's just a really balanced offense right now, but I do think that they need to maybe test the waters with Ohio State's run game, start getting pressure into the backfield, get pressure on Julian Sayin to make Ohio State's offense a little bit more one-dimensional. If nothing else, then they are forcing Ohio State into more passing situations. And if Ohio State misses on those, clock stops, that gives more time of possession to Washington. If Washington can be very efficient like they are normally with the ball, burn some time off the clock, and end drives with points, one way or the other, touchdown or a field goal, they have a shot. I do think that they have a shot. And I think that they're looking at it like they could win this game. And I think that they have a good chance to win this game. It'll just be really interesting to see how Jedd Fisch approaches this game. Because I do think that, I don't think anybody in the country would look at Ohio State and Washington and say that they're, close as far as talent is concerned. And maybe they're closer than it seems. But it's just we've gotten so used to Ohio State being Ohio State that when they go up against a Washington, and Washington's struggled lately, that you kind of, maybe the rose-colored or scarlet-colored glasses come on a little bit, and we misjudge the situation there. But it will be interesting to see how Jedd Fisch approaches this, because I do think that if Washington plays fundamentally sound football, that they have a shot at winning this game. They just need to come in with the right scheme. And it'll be interesting to see how they approach that. But I'm going to leave it right there. Those are my 5 reasons why Washington can upset Ohio State. Why do you think Washington can upset Ohio State? Or do you think that they have no shot at upsetting Ohio State? Let me know in the comments section. And if you don't mind liking and subscribing, that would just be awesome. And we will catch you in the next video.